If you've never lived in an HOA-run neighborhood, let me explain what it's like. Imagine a perfectly manicured suburb lined with identical houses, each one painted in an HOA-approved shade of suburban beige or oppressive ecru. A place where the lawns are cut to exactly 2.5 inches, fences are precisely 4 feet high, and God help you if your trash can is visible from the street for even a minute past collection time. Now imagine that one person, that one power-drunk suburban tyrant, who treats these rules not as guidelines, but as the unbreakable tenets of some sacred doctrine. The kind of person who wields a clipboard like a medieval battle axe and has an arsenal of passive-aggressive emails ready to fire at a moment's notice. Meet Linda Culpepper. Linda, with her immaculately pressed capris, aggressively highlighted hair, and an expression permanently set somewhere between disapproval and constipation, was the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood. Technically, she was the president of the Homeowners Association, but that title didn't quite capture the depth of her tyranny. No, Linda ruled this place like a suburban dictator, and nothing, absolutely nothing, escaped her notice. Before we continue with this story, let us know where you're watching from. Drop a like on the video and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow we've got another crazy Karen story you won't want to miss. I should have known better than to get on her radar. I should have laid low, blended in, kept my head down like everyone else, but no, I had the audacity to stain my wooden fence a color that was, gasp, not HOA approved. It wasn't like I painted it neon green or scrawled profanity across it. No, I stained it a perfectly respectable shade of dark walnut, which, in my opinion, looked a hell of a lot better than the HOA's preferred shade of weathered driftwood, which, let's be honest, was just a fancy way of saying grayish sadness. The letter arrived 2 days later. Dear Mr. Hendricks, it has come to our attention that your fence is in violation of the HOA's aesthetic standards. As per Section 14, subsection B of the Covenant Agreement, all external structures must adhere to the pre-approved color palette. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $50 per day until the issue is resolved. Sincerely, Linda Culpepper, HOA. President, I laughed. $50 a day for a fence stain? That was absurd. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I ignored it. Big mistake. 3 days later, another letter arrived. This one wasn't so polite. Mr. Hendricks, as you have failed to rectify the violation, the HOA is prepared to escalate this matter. You are hereby ordered to submit an official compliance plan within 5 business days. Continued non-compliance may result in further action, including but not limited to additional fines, suspension of community privileges, and legal recourse. Respectfully, Linda Culpepper. Respectfully. The universal code for, I'm about to make your life hell, but I want to sound professional about it. I should have just caved. I should have restained the fence, swallowed my pride, and gone about my life. But no. Linda had thrown down the gauntlet, and I wasn't about to roll over, so I did the next best thing. I stained the rest of my deck the same shade as the fence. The escalation was immediate. I woke up to find Linda standing in my yard, clipboard in hand, phone held at an accusatory angle, as if she were gathering evidence for a war crimes tribunal. "Mr. Hendricks," she called, voice sharp enough to pierce steel. "Linda," I greeted her, sipping my coffee. She pursed her lips. "You are now in violation of multiple HOA statutes. This is not a joke. I assure you I'm taking this very seriously." I took another sip. She narrowed her eyes. "I will not allow one resident to undermine the harmony of this community." I gestured, vaguely to the rest of the street. "I'm pretty sure harmony is intact, Linda." Her eyes twitched. "This is your final warning. Fix it, or face the consequences." And with that, she stomped off, leaving a trail of rage in her wake. For a week, I held firm. Fines started stacking up, but I figured I could fight them. Then Linda escalated. The official complaint arrived in my mailbox with the force of a death sentence. Dear Mr. Hendricks, due to ongoing noncompliance, the HOA board has voted to pursue legal action. Additionally, as per our bylaws, repeated violations may result in the initiation of an eviction process for homeowners who refuse to comply with community regulations. Consider this your final notice. Sincerely, Linda Culpepper, I had to reread that last part. Eviction? Was that even legal? Could they actually do that? I stormed into the HOA office. Well, actually, the HOA's designated meeting room inside the local community center, but Linda treated it like the White House Situation Room. Linda, what the hell is this? I slapped the letter down on the table. She barely looked up from her laptop. It's exactly what it says, Mr. Hendricks. Continued defiance of HOA standards can result in termination of residency. Termination. Of, Linda, this is my house. She folded her hands primly. And you agreed to the rules when you moved in. If you refuse to follow them, the HOA has the authority to seek removal. You can't be serious. She gave me a tight, smug smile. I take my responsibilities very seriously, Mr. Hendricks. I left, fuming. This was beyond ridiculous. She was actually trying to evict me over a fence stain. But then something happened. Something that changed everything. While digging through the HOA bylaws to find a way to fight back, I stumbled upon an old land record. It was a historical document about the founding of our town, and right there, in black and white, was a name I never expected to see. My last name. Because, as it turned out, this entire town, the one Linda was trying to kick me out of, yeah, my family founded it. I sat there, staring at the document like it had just whispered a secret meant to change my entire existence. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but the words were still clear as day. My great-great-grandfather, William Hendricks, had been one of the original settlers who established this town. He had owned vast stretches of land, before parceling it out, piece by piece, to form what eventually became our modern community. And here I was, getting eviction notices from Linda Culpepper. I nearly laughed out loud. The irony of it was almost poetic. She was threatening to kick me out of a town that, by all accounts, I had more historical claim to than anyone else, including her. But before I started drafting my victory speech, I needed to figure out exactly how much power this gave me. Dug deeper into the records, flipping through every bylaw, every legal document tied to the HOA's authority. That's when I found something even better than I expected. An archaic clause buried in an original land agreement. It outlined a little-known stipulation. The Hendricks family retained historical authority over disputes concerning land and property rights if invoked under specific conditions. Now, this was where it got interesting. From what I could tell, nobody had ever attempted to use this clause, likely because no one in my family had ever cared enough to contest anything. But if I played my cards right, I could pull the rug out from under Linda's entire operation. It was time to have some fun. The next morning, I made my move. I strolled right into the HOA's weekly meeting, which Linda ran with all the grace of a totalitarian regime. A few homeowners were already seated, looking half bored, half fearful, while Linda sat at the front of the room like a judge presiding over sentencing. She saw me and smirked. "Mr. Hendricks, I assume you're here to finally comply." "Actually," I said, taking a seat, "I'm here to discuss the validity of your authority." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." I pulled out the document and slid it across the table. This town was founded by my family, and according to this original agreement, I tapped the paper, enjoying the way her eye twitched. I have the right to challenge any and all property-related disputes that occur within the town's limits. For a second, Linda just stared at it. Then she scoffed. "This is ridiculous. That agreement is over 100 years old." "Still legally binding," I said with a grin. "Unless, of course, you'd like to challenge that in court. I'd love to see how a judge reacts to you trying to evict someone whose family literally built this town." A murmur rippled through the other homeowners. A few people exchanged glances, intrigued. Linda's grip tightened on her clipboard. "This doesn't change the fact that you are still in violation of HOA rules." "It does," I countered. "Because if I decide to invoke my historical rights, I can challenge any HOA rule that infringes on property rights." I leaned back. "Including those absurd fines you've been slapping on me." Linda's lips thinned. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," I said. "And let's not forget the legal fees you'd have to cover if this went to court. The HOA would be on the hook for that." I shrugged. Not sure the other residents would be thrilled about footing that bill. That last part was strategic. I saw the ripple of concern move through the room. Nobody liked paying extra HOA fees, and the idea of their money going towards some ridiculous legal battle over a fence stain, that wasn't going to sit well. Linda's face darkened. She was losing control of the room, and she knew it. But she wasn't going to go down without a fight. I'll have to consult with legal counsel, she snapped, shoving the document aside. In the meantime, your violations still stand. Go right ahead, I said cheerfully. I'll be waiting. I walked out of that meeting feeling the tide start to turn. But I knew Linda wouldn't let this go. She wasn't the type to back down gracefully. No, she was going to double down. And sure enough, she did. 2 days later, I woke up to find a tow truck in my driveway. My car, my own damn car, was being hooked up to be towed away. I stormed outside, barely dressed, heart pounding. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? The tow truck driver barely glanced at me. Orders from the HOA. Says your vehicle's in violation. In violation of what? Linda's voice rang out from the sidewalk. Section 8, subsection D. Vehicles may not be parked in the driveway for more than 48 consecutive hours without being moved. I turned to her, incredulous. That's not even a real rule. It is now, she said smugly. As of this morning. She had literally invented a new rule overnight just to screw me over. But the moment I saw the smirk on her face, I knew one thing. She had just overplayed her hand. I let her gloat, let her feel like she'd won this round. But she had no idea what was coming next, because if she wanted to play dirty, I was about to bury her. Linda had no idea what was coming next. She thought she had won. She thought she had me cornered, watching my car get towed away with that smug, self-satisfied smirk. But what she didn't realize was that she had just made the fatal mistake of every petty tyrant. She got greedy. She had played her hand too aggressively, pushed too far, and now it was my turn. I spent the next 24 hours putting my plan together. The first step? Making sure the rest of the neighborhood knew exactly who they were dealing with. You see, Linda had ruled with fear for so long that most people just accepted her nonsense as the natural order of things. But that was before she made her biggest mistake, messing with me. And I was about to show the entire neighborhood just how vulnerable she really was. I started by filing an official complaint against her. Turns out HOA presidents aren't immune to their own rules, especially when they've been breaking them for years. With a little digging, I found out that Linda's front yard flower beds extended 6 inches beyond the allowable boundary. That might seem minor, but in her world it was a direct violation of the landscaping regulations. I filed the complaint anonymously and let the process play out. But that was just the warm-up. The real fun began when I invoked the historical clause. From the land agreement, I scheduled an emergency community meeting, which, thanks to the bylaws, Linda had to attend. If she refused, she'd technically be in violation of HOA regulations. That was the beauty of bureaucracy. It worked both ways. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Homeowners, many of whom had suffered under Linda's rule for years, showed up, curious to see what was going down. Linda arrived late, looking irritated but composed. She still thought she had the upper hand. She didn't. I stood up and addressed the crowd. I know many of you have dealt with ridiculous HOA rules over the years, I began. Some of you have been fined for trivial things, harassed over minor infractions, or even had your property rights threatened. And we all know who's been behind it. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but I could see heads nodding. Linda rolled her eyes. This is nonsense, she said dismissively. If people followed the rules, they wouldn't have issues. I smiled. Funny you say that, Linda, because you haven't been following the rules. Murmurs spread through the room. What are you talking about? She snapped. I pulled out the official complaint about her flower beds and handed it to her. By your own standards, you are in violation, and since we all know how strictly you enforce the rules, I'm sure you won't mind fixing it immediately, or facing the same escalating fines you love handing out. Her face turned red. This is absurd. Oh, and there's more. I continued, let's talk about the legal complaint you filed against me. You claimed you had the authority to evict homeowners who don't comply with HOA standards. But according to this, I held up a document. The original land agreement supersedes any HOA bylaw, which means you don't have the authority to evict anyone. In fact, this entire HOA has been operating on power it doesn't legally have. Gasps rippled through the room. People began murmuring louder, some whispering to their spouses, others looking at Linda with new suspicion. That's ridiculous, Linda stammered. Is it? I said. Because I checked. And I also found that the HOA misfiled its renewal paperwork last year. I turned to the crowd. Meaning, legally speaking, the HOA no longer has any power at all. Silence. Then chaos. Homeowners started shouting over each other. People who had spent years being fined, harassed, and bullied by Linda suddenly realized that all of it had been built on nothing. And Linda knew it. I watched as her face contorted, her composure cracking. That's not true. You can't. I can, I said. And I did. The paperwork's been filed. The HOA is officially defunct as of today. The room erupted. People were cheering, some laughing in sheer disbelief. A few neighbors patted me on the back. Linda? She looked like her entire world had just imploded. Because it had. Her power, gone. Her control, shattered. Her ability to torment people for minor infractions, dead. She stormed out, red-faced and seething, but it didn't matter. The neighborhood was free. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was almost immediate. People stopped living in fear of Linda's petty tyranny. Fences got painted, whatever color people wanted. Driveways had cars in them again. It was like the town took a deep breath and exhaled years of built-up frustration. As for Linda, well, in the ultimate stroke of poetic justice, she tried to fight back, only to realize that without the HOA, she was just another homeowner. And guess what? The new community leadership, run by an actual reasonable group of residents, started enforcing rules fairly, which meant Linda's own violations. Yeah, she got fined. Repeatedly, and in the greatest twist of fate, when she refused to comply, she ended up facing legal action herself. She moved out 6 months later. Poetic justice. And as for me, I repainted my fence in a brand new color. I called it Freedom Walnut.